"Get out of this store. People like you can't afford any of the cars here." The dealership branch manager Brenda Wilson screamed in the air as goodbye. Two security guards escorted a well-dressed black woman toward the glass doors of Beverly Hills' most prestigious Mercedes dealership. She didn't fight. She didn't yell. She walked with her head held high, her designer handbag clutched firmly in her hand, while every eye in that luxury showroom watched her every step. Behind the polished marble counter stood Brenda Wilson, the general manager, arms crossed with a satisfied smirk on her face. She had just thrown out what she considered another one of those people who didn't belong in her high-end establishment. In her mind, she was protecting her business from someone who clearly couldn't afford to be there. Brenda watched those glass doors close like she had just solved a problem. She turned to her staff and said what she always said after moments like this. "We have standards to maintain here. This isn't a charity." What Brenda didn't know was that she had just made the biggest mistake of her career. Because 7 minutes later, those same security guards walked Brenda Wilson out of that dealership instead. And she never worked in automotive again. 7 minutes. That's how long it took for everything to change. 7 minutes for justice to walk back through those glass doors and destroy everything Brenda thought she knew about power. The woman they escorted out wasn't just another black customer they could dismiss and disrespect. She wasn't someone they could judge by the color of her skin and assume didn't belong in their world of luxury cars and entitled service. Brenda Wilson thought she was running her dealership. She thought she was in control. She thought she could treat people however she wanted based on how they looked. She was wrong about everything. If you want to see exactly how this story of justice unfolds, hit that subscribe button right now and tell us where you're watching from. Because what happens next will shock you. Have you ever been judged or treated differently because of how you looked? Let me know in the comments. But first, let me tell you who this woman really was, and why Brenda Wilson's world was about to crumble. The woman who walked into that Mercedes dealership that day was Stephanie Thompson. At 45 years old, she was the CEO and owner of Thompson Automotive Group, an empire that stretched across 5 states with 23 dealerships under her control. But you wouldn't know any of that by looking at her that morning. Stephanie pulled into the parking lot driving a modest 2018 Honda Civic. Not exactly what you'd expect from someone who could buy every car in that showroom without blinking. But that Honda wasn't just transportation for Stephanie. It was a reminder. A reminder of where she came from and why she never wanted to forget. Growing up in Detroit, Stephanie knew struggle intimately. Her father, Marcus Thompson, spent 12-hour days as a mechanic, coming home with grease under his fingernails and exhaustion in his bones. Her mother, Diana, cleaned office buildings at night, mopping floors and emptying trash cans while the city slept. They worked multiple jobs just to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. Stephanie remembered watching her parents count pennies to buy her school supplies. She remembered wearing the same pair of shoes until they fell apart because there wasn't money for new ones. But most of all, she remembered the way people looked at her family. Like they didn't belong, like they weren't good enough, like they should be grateful for whatever scraps they could get. That little girl from Detroit had built something extraordinary. When her grandfather left her a small used car lot in his will, everyone expected her to sell it. Instead, she saw opportunity. She worked 18-hour days, learned every aspect of the business, and slowly, methodically, built an automotive empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But success hadn't changed how the world saw her, and that's exactly why she was there that day. Wilson Mercedes of Beverly Hills was her newest acquisition. She'd bought it 3 weeks earlier, but the staff didn't know that yet. This was what she called a mystery shopping trip, a chance to see exactly what kind of business she'd inherited and what kind of people were running it. The dealership itself was a monument to luxury and prestige, sitting on one of the most expensive pieces of real estate in Beverly Hills. Glass walls showcased gleaming Mercedes vehicles that cost more than most people's houses. Everything looked perfect from the outside. But Stephanie knew that sometimes the most beautiful exteriors hid the ugliest truths. Running this particular dealership was Brenda Wilson, a 42-year-old woman who had inherited the business from her grandfather, just like Stephanie had inherited hers. But that's where the similarities ended. Brenda Wilson believed she was born to run that dealership. Third-generation wealth had given her everything she'd ever wanted without having to work for any of it. She looked at her grandfather's portrait hanging in her office and saw destiny, not responsibility. Despite being a woman fighting for respect in a male-dominated industry, Brenda had learned all the wrong lessons. Instead of using her position to lift up other women and minorities, she'd become the very thing that had once held her back. She treated people of color like threats to her success, like problems to be eliminated rather than customers to be served. Her staff reflected her leadership. Some were genuinely good salespeople who had learned to keep their heads down and follow orders. Others had bought into Brenda's toxic culture completely, treating discrimination like a business strategy. The irony was devastating. Despite being located in one of the most prestigious areas in the country, the dealership was struggling. Customers were going elsewhere, sales were dropping, and reviews were terrible. But instead of examining their practices, Brenda blamed external factors, never looking in the mirror. When Stephanie walked through those glass doors that morning, she was dressed professionally but casually. Nice slacks, a simple blouse, comfortable shoes. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed wealth or power. She wanted to see exactly how they treated someone who looked like her when they had no idea who she really was. The treatment started immediately. While a white couple who had entered just minutes before her was approached by 3 different salespeople eager to help, Stephanie stood near the entrance for several minutes, completely ignored. She watched as staff members made eye contact with her and then quickly looked away. She heard whispered conversations behind the counter, saw pointing and smirking. They had already decided she didn't belong there, already determined she couldn't afford anything they were selling. From her glass office overlooking the showroom floor, Brenda Wilson watched it all unfold. She made comments to her assistant about those people who wandered into high-end dealerships just to waste everyone's time. In her mind, this was good business, protecting her staff from having to deal with customers who weren't serious buyers. Stephanie decided to test their assumptions. She approached the nearest salesperson and asked about their most expensive vehicles. The response was immediate and predictable. Condescending suggestions that she might be more comfortable looking at their certified pre-owned inventory, or perhaps visiting a different type of dealership altogether. When she persisted and asked about the $150,000 S-Class Mercedes sitting in the center of the showroom, the responses became even more dismissive. They questioned whether she understood what luxury vehicles cost, suggested she might want to start with something more practical, and made it clear that they didn't believe she belonged there. What none of them realized was that Stephanie Thompson owned dealerships that sold more cars in a month than Wilson Mercedes sold in a year. What they didn't know was that she was already their boss, and she was watching every interaction, noting every discriminatory practice, documenting every moment of disrespect. Because Stephanie Thompson was about to show Brenda Wilson and her entire staff exactly what happens when you judge someone by their appearance, instead of treating them with basic human respect. If you believe everyone should be respected no matter who they are, type respect in the comments and hit the subscribe button for more stories like this. After 20 minutes of being treated like she was invisible, Stephanie Thompson decided to push things further. She walked directly to the centerpiece of the showroom, a gleaming black S-Class Mercedes with a sticker price of $150,000. The car sat under perfect lighting, polished to mirror perfection, representing everything this dealership claimed to offer. Stephanie approached the nearest salesperson and said something that changed the entire atmosphere in that room. She asked for a test drive. The salesperson's face went blank. He looked around nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the request. Within seconds, word traveled across that showroom floor like wildfire. The black woman who had been wandering around asking questions now wanted to test drive their most expensive vehicle. That's when Brenda Wilson decided to handle the situation personally. Brenda walked out of her glass office with the confidence of someone who had never been challenged in her life. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she approached Stephanie with a smile that never reached her eyes. This wasn't customer service. This was damage control. The first words out of Brenda's mouth revealed everything you needed to know about her character. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't welcome Stephanie to the dealership. Instead, she immediately demanded to see a credit report and proof of income before any test drive could happen. Now here's what made this moment so revealing. Just 15 minutes earlier, Stephanie had watched a white couple get handed keys to test drive a $200,000 AMG without showing so much as a driver's license. They had walked in wearing jeans and t-shirts, pointed to the car they wanted to drive, and were treated like royalty. But Stephanie, dressed professionally in business attire, was being asked to prove she deserved to even sit in the vehicle. Stephanie reached into her purse and pulled out her business credit card. It was black, premium, with Thompson Automotive Group printed clearly across the front. Any finance manager worth their salary would have recognized it as a commercial account with unlimited purchasing power. Brenda took the card, walked to the finance desk, and returned 5 minutes later with a look of manufactured disappointment. The system was down, she claimed. They couldn't run credit checks right now. Maybe Stephanie could come back another day. It was a lie, and everyone in that room knew it. The system wasn't down. It never was. This was Brenda's standard procedure for customers she didn't want to deal with. Then came the humiliation that would haunt Brenda Wilson for the rest of her life. Standing in the middle of that luxury showroom, surrounded by other customers and staff members, Brenda Wilson looked Stephanie Thompson directly in the eyes and suggested she might be more comfortable shopping at a used car lot down the street. She said it loud enough for everyone to hear, with just enough fake concern to make it sound helpful, rather than hostile. The room went silent. Other customers stopped their conversations and stared. The staff pretended to be busy, but hung on every word. Everyone knew they were witnessing something terrible, but nobody stepped up to stop it. What they didn't know was that Stephanie Thompson was fighting an internal war that was tearing her apart. Every fiber of her being wanted to reveal who she really was. She wanted to pull out her phone, call her assistant, and watch Brenda's face crumble when she realized she was speaking to her new boss. But Stephanie also knew that the moment she revealed her identity, this performance would end. Brenda would switch to damage control mode, offer fake apologies, and try to cover up what had just happened. The real truth about how this dealership operated would disappear behind a wall of corporate politeness. So Stephanie Thompson, CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, swallowed her pride and continued to let herself be humiliated because she needed to see just how deep this toxicity ran. That's when something unexpected happened. Something that gave Stephanie the first glimpse of hope in this sea of discrimination. A young Latina woman named Jennifer Martinez approached them. Jennifer was new to the dealership, hired just 3 weeks earlier, and she still believed that customer service meant treating everyone with respect, regardless of how they looked or what they drove. Jennifer stepped forward with genuine professionalism and offered to help Stephanie with anything she needed. She spoke to Stephanie the way she would speak to any customer, with courtesy, respect, and actual interest in making a sale. The change in atmosphere was immediate and powerful. Here was someone who saw Stephanie as a person, not a problem to be solved. But Jennifer's kindness came with a price. Brenda Wilson's reaction was swift and vicious. She pulled Jennifer aside, right there in front of everyone, and reprimanded her for wasting time on tire kickers. She said it loud enough for Stephanie to hear every word, making it clear that helping customers who looked like Stephanie was considered a waste of company time. Jennifer's face flushed with embarrassment and confusion. She looked back at Stephanie with apologetic eyes, torn between doing her job and keeping her employment. Watching this unfold was Robert Chen, the dealership's finance manager. Robert was Asian American, 34 years old, and had worked in automotive finance for over a decade. He had witnessed scenes like this before, and each time he felt the same conflicted emotions eating away at him. Robert knew what was happening was wrong. He recognized discrimination when he saw it because he had experienced it himself. But he also had a mortgage, 2 kids, and a wife who was battling cancer. He couldn't afford to lose his job, couldn't risk speaking up against Brenda Wilson's toxic leadership. So Robert Chen did what he always did. He looked away, kept his mouth shut, and hated himself a little more each time. But there was one person in that dealership who wasn't afraid to show solidarity, even if he couldn't speak up directly. Marcus Williams worked in the service department. He was a 38-year-old black man who had been fixing cars for 15 years and knew more about Mercedes vehicles than anyone in that building. Marcus rarely came out to the showroom floor, but today he had a reason to walk through. When Marcus made eye contact with Stephanie, something passed between them that needed no words. It was the recognition that comes from shared experience, the understanding that comes from facing the same prejudices and assumptions. Marcus didn't say anything. He couldn't without risking his job. But in his eyes, Stephanie saw acknowledgement of what was happening to her. She saw someone who understood exactly how she felt in that moment. These small moments of human connection made what happened next even more devastating. After 30 minutes of subtle humiliation and systemic discrimination, Stephanie Thompson decided to escalate the situation. She asked to speak with the general manager, hoping that maybe someone in leadership would show basic professionalism and human decency. That's when Brenda Wilson revealed something that stopped Stephanie cold. Brenda smiled with pure satisfaction and announced that she was the general manager. There was no higher authority to appeal to, no supervisor who might overrule her decisions. This toxic environment started at the top and flowed downward through every level of the organization. With that revelation, Brenda Wilson's mask finally slipped completely. No longer pretending to be helpful or professional, Brenda became openly hostile. She accused Stephanie of playing games, of wasting everyone's time, of being the kind of customer who came into luxury dealerships just to cause trouble. The accusations were loaded with racial stereotypes and assumptions that revealed the depth of Brenda's prejudice. In her mind, Stephanie couldn't possibly be a legitimate customer. Black women didn't buy $150,000 cars from her dealership. They were either scammers, troublemakers, or people who didn't understand their place in the world. Brenda's voice grew louder with each accusation. She wasn't just speaking to Stephanie anymore. She was performing for the entire showroom, establishing her authority and making it clear that people like Stephanie weren't welcome in her establishment. The other customers in the showroom began to stare more openly now. Some looked uncomfortable with what they were witnessing, but none stepped forward to intervene. Others seemed to approve of Brenda's handling of the situation, nodding along with her assertions that this woman was clearly wasting everyone's time. Stephanie felt the weight of every eye in that room. She felt the shame that comes not from doing something wrong, but from being treated as if you've done something wrong simply by existing. She felt the burning humiliation of being reduced to a stereotype, of having her character questioned because of the color of her skin. But even in that moment of public humiliation, Stephanie Thompson maintained her dignity. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't curse or make threats. She stood there and took it all, because she knew that her reaction would be judged more harshly than Brenda's actions. Jennifer Martinez watched this unfold with growing horror. This young woman had taken a job at what she thought was a prestigious dealership, hoping to build a career in automotive sales. Instead, she was witnessing systematic discrimination that went against everything she believed about how people should be treated. Jennifer tried to step in one more time. She approached Brenda and quietly suggested that maybe they could find a way to help the customer. Her voice was respectful, her approach was professional, but her intention was clear. She thought what was happening was wrong. Brenda Wilson's response was swift and brutal. She turned on Jennifer with fury that had been building for the entire encounter and threatened her with immediate termination. She accused Jennifer of undermining her authority, of not understanding how business worked, of being too new to know better. The threat was clear: stay in line or lose your job. Support discrimination or find yourself unemployed. Jennifer stepped back, tears forming in her eyes, caught between her conscience and her livelihood. That's when Brenda Wilson made the decision that would destroy her career forever. She announced, loud enough for everyone to hear, that if Stephanie didn't leave immediately, she would call security. She claimed that Stephanie was being disruptive, causing problems, and making other customers uncomfortable. None of it was true. Stephanie had been nothing but professional throughout the entire encounter. She had asked reasonable questions, made legitimate requests, and maintained her composure despite increasingly hostile treatment. But truth didn't matter to Brenda Wilson. Power mattered. Control mattered. Making sure that people knew their place mattered. Brenda walked to her office, picked up the phone, and called building security. When the security guards arrived, Stephanie Thompson faced a choice that would define not just this moment, but everything that followed. She could reveal who she really was, could use her power to stop this humiliation before it went any further. Or she could let it happen, could gather the evidence she needed to clean house properly. Stephanie Thompson chose justice over pride. As the security guards approached her, Stephanie maintained the same dignity she had shown throughout the entire ordeal. She didn't argue with them. They were just doing their jobs. She didn't make a scene or demand explanations. She simply gathered her purse and walked toward those glass doors with her head held high. But as she passed Jennifer Martinez, Stephanie leaned close and whispered something that would stay with the young saleswoman forever. She said, "Sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is from the inside." Jennifer didn't understand what those words meant in that moment. She just saw them as the final statement from a woman who had been treated terribly, but refused to let it break her spirit. The security cameras captured every moment of what happened next. They recorded Stephanie Thompson being escorted out of Wilson Mercedes like a criminal, despite never raising her voice or breaking any rules. They documented Brenda Wilson's satisfied smile as she watched from her office window. They preserved the uncomfortable looks on other customers' faces as they witnessed systematic discrimination in action. Most importantly, those cameras captured evidence that would soon be used to destroy the very system that had created this moment. Stephanie Thompson sat in her modest Honda Civic in the parking lot, watching the dealership through her windshield. For a moment, she let herself feel the full weight of what had just happened. The humiliation, the anger, the frustration of being judged by her appearance rather than her character. Then she reached for her phone and made a call that would change everything. Her assistant, Tom Bradley, answered on the first ring, and Stephanie's first words told him everything he needed to know about how bad the situation really was. "Tom," she said, her voice steady but filled with determination, "it's worse than we thought. Initiate Protocol 7. Protocol 7 was something Stephanie had hoped she would never have to use. It was the complete systematic replacement of management and staff when a dealership's culture was beyond repair. It was the nuclear option, reserved for situations where discrimination was so deeply embedded that nothing short of starting over would fix it. Tom Bradley had been Stephanie's assistant for 8 years. He had seen her build her empire through intelligence, hard work, and treating people with respect. He had also seen her face discrimination in boardrooms and business deals where people underestimated her because of her race and gender. But he had never heard the particular tone in her voice that he heard right now. This wasn't just business for Stephanie Thompson. This was personal. This was about every black woman who had ever been made to feel like she didn't belong. Every person who had been judged by their appearance rather than their worth. As Stephanie drove away from Wilson Mercedes, she knew that in just a few minutes she would walk back through those same glass doors. But when she did, it wouldn't be as the woman they had just humiliated and dismissed. She would return as their boss. And Brenda Wilson's world was about to collapse completely. If you want to see exactly how this story of justice and revenge unfolds, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens next will absolutely blow your mind. Because Stephanie Thompson was about to deliver the most satisfying dose of justice you've ever seen, and Brenda Wilson was about to learn that actions have consequences. 7 minutes. That's all it took for Stephanie Thompson's world to shift from humiliation to justice. 7 minutes for everything Brenda Wilson thought she knew about power to crumble into dust. Brenda was still basking in her victory, still riding the high of what she believed was another successful removal of an undesirable customer from her pristine showroom. She had returned to her glass office, settled back into her leather chair, and was probably already crafting the story she would tell her staff about maintaining standards and protecting their business from troublemakers. That's when she noticed the black town car pulling into the parking lot. Tom Bradley stepped out of that vehicle like a man on a mission. At 52 years old, Tom had been Stephanie's right-hand man for 8 years, and he had seen his boss face discrimination before. But never like this, never with this level of systematic humiliation and public degradation. Tom wasn't alone. Behind him emerged 3 people in expensive suits carrying leather briefcases. They moved with the precision and authority that only comes from legal training and corporate power. This was Stephanie's legal team, and they had been summoned for one purpose: to execute Protocol 7. From her office window, Brenda Wilson watched this group approach her dealership with growing unease. Something about their purposeful stride, their professional appearance, and their serious expressions sent warning signals through her mind. But Brenda Wilson had spent her entire life believing that her privilege would protect her from consequences. Her grandfather's name was on the building. Her family had connections throughout Beverly Hills. In her world, people like her didn't face real accountability for their actions. So when Tom Bradley walked through those glass doors, Brenda's first instinct was dismissal, mixed with annoyance. She assumed they were what she called ambulance chasers, lawyers looking to file discrimination lawsuits against successful businesses. In her mind, this was just another scam, another attempt by those people to take advantage of hardworking business owners. Brenda had dealt with situations like this before. Her standard procedure was to let them make their threats, offer a small settlement to make them go away, and then continue operating exactly as she always had. She had never lost a discrimination case because she was careful about covering her tracks. But she had never dealt with Tom Bradley. Tom approached the reception desk with calm professionalism. His voice was steady, his demeanor respectful, but there was something in his eyes that suggested this wasn't going to be a typical legal shakedown. He asked to speak with Brenda Wilson privately, not aggressively, not with threats or demands, just a simple request for a few minutes of her time. Brenda emerged from her office with the confidence of someone who had never truly been challenged. She looked at Tom and his team with barely concealed contempt, already planning how quickly she could dismiss whatever nonsense they were about to present. Tom didn't waste time with small talk or pleasantries. He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a manila folder that would change Brenda Wilson's life forever. The folder was thick, official, and marked with corporate seals that even Brenda recognized as legitimate business documents. Tom handed it to her with the same calm professionalism he had shown since walking through the door. The label on that folder read, Thompson Automotive Group, Change of Ownership. For a moment, Brenda stared at those words without comprehension. Thompson Automotive Group. She had heard that name before, somewhere in the back of her mind, but couldn't quite place it. Then she opened the folder. The first document was a purchase agreement dated 3 weeks earlier. Wilson Mercedes of Beverly Hills had been acquired by Thompson Automotive Group for $47 million. The transaction had been completed, all legal requirements had been met, and ownership had officially transferred. Brenda's hands began to shake as she read through page after page of legal documentation. Purchase agreements, financing records, board resolutions, and transfer documents, all bearing official seals and signatures that proved this wasn't some elaborate fraud. But it was the final page that made Brenda Wilson's blood run cold. There, in clear black and white text, was the signature of the new owner. Stephanie Thompson, Chief Executive Officer, Thompson Automotive Group. The woman she had just humiliated and had thrown out of her dealership wasn't just a customer. She wasn't just someone who had wandered in off the street looking for trouble. She was Brenda Wilson's new boss. Brenda's face went through a transformation that Tom Bradley would remember for the rest of his life. The arrogant confidence melted away first, replaced by confusion. Then came disbelief, as her mind tried to process what she was reading. Finally, pure terror washed over her features as the full implications of what she had done crashed down on her. While Brenda stood there in shock, reading and rereading those documents as if they might change, the glass doors of the dealership opened once again. Stephanie Thompson walked back into Wilson Mercedes, but this time everything was different. Gone was the woman who had been treated like she didn't belong. Gone was the customer who had swallowed humiliation and maintained dignity in the face of discrimination. This was Stephanie Thompson, CEO. This was a woman who owned 23 dealerships and employed over 800 people. This was someone who had built an automotive empire through intelligence, determination, and treating people with respect. Her posture was different now. Her walk commanded attention. Her presence filled that showroom in a way that made everyone stop what they were doing and pay attention. But most importantly, her voice carried the authority of someone who was no longer pretending to be powerless. Stephanie walked directly to Brenda Wilson, who was still clutching those ownership documents like they might disappear if she let go. The entire showroom fell silent. Every customer stopped talking. Every staff member froze in place. Even the background music seemed to fade as everyone sensed they were about to witness something extraordinary. Stephanie looked Brenda Wilson directly in the eyes, the same eyes that had looked at her with contempt and dismissed her as unworthy just minutes earlier. When Stephanie spoke, her voice carried across that entire showroom with crystal clarity. "Miss Wilson," she said, "I'm Stephanie Thompson, your new owner. You have 7 minutes to clear out your office." 7 minutes. The same amount of time it had taken for this entire situation to unfold. The same span that had seemed like an eternity when Stephanie was being humiliated and escorted out by security. Now those 7 minutes belonged to Brenda Wilson, and they would be the longest 7 minutes of her life. The reaction throughout the dealership was immediate and electric. Jennifer Martinez, the young Latina saleswoman who had tried to help Stephanie and been threatened with termination for it, stood frozen behind the reception desk with her mouth open in shock. Suddenly, those whispered words made sense. Sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is from the inside. Robert Chen, the finance manager who had watched the discrimination happen and said nothing, felt his stomach drop as he realized he had been complicit in the humiliation of his new boss. Every moment of silence, every time he had looked away instead of speaking up, now carried the weight of potential career destruction. Marcus Williams, the black mechanic who had shared that knowing look with Stephanie, allowed himself a small smile as justice finally arrived. He had seen too many moments like the one that had just occurred, too many times when discrimination went unpunished and dignity went undefended. But it was the other customers in that showroom whose reactions revealed the most about what had just happened. The same people who had watched Stephanie being humiliated and said nothing, who had witnessed systematic discrimination and chosen silence, were now scrambling to distance themselves from what they had seen. Some pretended they hadn't been there for the earlier incident. Others suddenly remembered urgent appointments they needed to attend. A few had the decency to look ashamed of their inaction, but most were simply concerned about being associated with a business that was clearly about to undergo major changes. The staff members who had participated in or enabled Stephanie's mistreatment were going through their own private reckonings. Some were calculating whether they could claim they had been following orders. Others were remembering every discriminatory comment they had made or laughed at, wondering if they would be held accountable for their complicity. But Brenda Wilson wasn't thinking about any of that. She was staring at the woman she had called a troublemaker, a time waster, someone who didn't belong in her establishment. She was looking at the person she had suggested would be more comfortable at a used car lot, the customer she had claimed was playing games and causing disruption. That woman was now her boss, and Brenda Wilson's career in automotive sales was over. The power dynamic had shifted so completely and so suddenly that it felt like the laws of physics had been suspended. The woman who had commanded security guards and demanded credit checks was now the one being given ultimatums and facing immediate termination. Stephanie didn't raise her voice. She didn't gloat or make speeches about karma and justice. She simply stood there with the quiet authority of someone who had been underestimated her entire life and had turned that underestimation into strength. 7 minutes to pack up a career built on privilege and prejudice. 7 minutes to face the consequences of treating human beings like they were less valuable because of the color of their skin. 7 minutes for Brenda Wilson to learn that actions have consequences. And sometimes those consequences come in ways you never expect. If you're loving this moment of justice and want to see exactly what happens during those 7 minutes, hit that subscribe button right now, because this story is about to reach levels of satisfaction you won't believe. Because those 7 minutes were just the beginning of Brenda Wilson's downfall, and what happened next would make sure she never treated another customer the way she treated Stephanie Thompson. Those 7 minutes that Stephanie Thompson gave Brenda Wilson turned into the most desperate and pathetic display of damage control you've ever witnessed. Instead of quietly accepting her fate and packing up her office with whatever dignity she had left, Brenda Wilson chose to fight. But not with grace or professionalism. She fought like someone who had never truly been held accountable for anything in her entire life. Brenda's first instinct was to threaten the very person who now controlled her future. Standing there in front of her entire staff and remaining customers, she pointed her finger at Stephanie Thompson and declared that she would file the biggest discrimination lawsuit in automotive history. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The woman who had just spent the last hour systematically discriminating against a customer was now claiming that she was the victim of discrimination. Brenda's voice rose as she built her case in front of everyone. She claimed that firing her was reverse racism. She argued that she was being targeted because she was white. She insisted that everything she had done was standard business practice, and that she was being railroaded by someone looking to make an example out of a successful woman. The desperation in her voice was palpable as she grasped for any argument that might save her career. She claimed she had been protecting the dealership from fraudulent customers. She insisted that demanding credit checks was just good business sense. She even had the audacity to suggest that Stephanie had been acting suspiciously and that any reasonable manager would have done the same thing. But Stephanie Thompson had been preparing for this moment from the second she walked out of that dealership 30 minutes earlier. Without saying a word, Stephanie pulled out her phone. The device that Brenda had probably assumed was just another piece of technology became the instrument of her complete destruction. Stephanie had called ahead before returning to the dealership. Her security team had already accessed the dealership's surveillance system and downloaded every second of footage from the past 2 hours. What Brenda Wilson didn't know was that her entire performance had been captured in high-definition video from multiple angles. Stephanie pressed play on a video that would haunt Brenda Wilson for the rest of her life. The footage showed everything. Stephanie entering the dealership and being ignored while white customers were immediately attended to. Brenda watching from her office and making dismissive gestures. The condescending treatment, the demands for credit checks that weren't required for other customers, and the humiliating suggestions that Stephanie shop somewhere more appropriate. But most damning of all was the audio. The dealership's security system had crystal-clear sound recording, and every word of Brenda's discriminatory comments had been captured for posterity. The room watched in stunned silence as Brenda's own words played back through Stephanie's phone speakers. Her suggestions about those people and tire kickers. Her comments about maintaining standards and protecting the business from customers who didn't belong. Her threats against Jennifer Martinez for trying to help a customer professionally. Every racist assumption, every discriminatory practice, every moment of systematic bias was there, in perfect digital clarity. When the video reached the part where Brenda called security on a customer who had done nothing wrong, you could hear a pin drop in that showroom. The footage showed Stephanie's dignity throughout the entire encounter, her professional demeanor, even as she was being escorted out by security guards. Stephanie let the video play until the very end, until the moment when she was led through those glass doors like a criminal for the crime of being black in a luxury car dealership. Then she looked up at Brenda Wilson and delivered a line that would echo through that woman's nightmares for years to come. This footage, along with testimonies from customers and staff, tells a different story than the one you're trying to sell. Brenda's face went white as she realized that her own actions had created an unwinnable legal case against her. Every discrimination lawsuit she was threatening to file would be met with video evidence of her own discriminatory behavior. Every claim of reverse racism would be countered with footage of actual racism in action. But Brenda Wilson still wasn't done humiliating herself. In a last-ditch effort to save her career, Brenda switched tactics completely. The threats disappeared, replaced by fake apologies and manufactured remorse that fooled absolutely no one. She claimed that there had been a misunderstanding. She insisted that she had been having a bad day and that her behavior didn't represent her true character. She offered excuses about corporate pressure and difficult customers, trying to paint herself as someone who had made an isolated mistake rather than someone who had built her career on systematic discrimination. The apologies came fast and desperate. She was sorry for any misunderstanding. She was sorry if Stephanie had felt uncomfortable. She was sorry that the situation had escalated. Each apology was carefully worded to avoid admitting actual wrongdoing while trying to minimize the damage to her reputation. Brenda even tried to blame her staff, suggesting that they had advised her poorly and that she had been following protocols that were already in place when she inherited the dealership. It was pathetic to watch. This woman who had commanded absolute authority just minutes earlier was now groveling and making excuses like a child caught stealing. But Stephanie Thompson had heard enough. She raised her hand to stop Brenda's rambling apologies and delivered a response that cut through all the noise and got to the heart of what this moment was really about. "This isn't about revenge," Stephanie said, her voice calm but filled with unmistakable authority. "This is about accountability." Those words hit Brenda Wilson like a physical blow. This wasn't personal vendetta or corporate politics. This was consequences for actions, responsibility for choices, and accountability for behavior that had gone unchecked for too long. Stephanie continued, her voice carrying across that showroom to every person who had witnessed what happened earlier. She explained that discrimination wasn't just morally wrong, it was bad for business, toxic to workplace culture, and damaging to everyone involved. She pointed out that Brenda's behavior hadn't just hurt one customer. It had created an environment where other employees felt pressured to participate in discrimination or risk their own jobs. It had driven away countless potential customers who sensed the toxic atmosphere and took their business elsewhere. This wasn't about punishment for punishment's sake. This was about creating change, establishing new standards, and making sure that what happened to her never happened to anyone else. With Brenda Wilson's fate sealed, Stephanie Thompson turned her attention to the staff members who had witnessed everything that transpired. The transformation that happened next was like watching justice flow through that dealership in real time. Jennifer Martinez, the young Latina saleswoman who had tried to help Stephanie and been threatened with termination for it, suddenly found herself being called forward by the new owner. Jennifer approached with obvious nervousness, probably expecting to be questioned about her role in the day's events. Instead, Stephanie offered her something she had never dreamed possible. "Jennifer," Stephanie said, "I watched you try to do the right thing today, even when it put your job at risk. That's exactly the kind of leadership this dealership needs. I'm promoting you to sales manager effective immediately." The shock on Jennifer's face was genuine and profound. In the span of 2 hours, she had gone from being a new hire, threatened with termination, to being the sales manager of a luxury car dealership. Her commitment to treating all customers with respect, regardless of their appearance, had just changed her entire life trajectory. But Stephanie wasn't done recognizing the people who had shown character during that difficult situation. Robert Chen, the finance manager who had witnessed the discrimination and remained silent, was called forward next. Robert approached with obvious anxiety, knowing that his inaction had been noted and wondering what consequences he might face. Stephanie's approach with Robert was different, but equally impactful. She acknowledged that remaining silent in the face of discrimination was a choice. But she also recognized that people in difficult positions often feel trapped between their conscience and their livelihood. Robert would keep his job, but with conditions. He would be enrolled in comprehensive diversity training, would be held personally accountable for creating an inclusive finance department, and would be expected to speak up against discrimination in the future. It was a second chance, but one that came with clear expectations and accountability measures. Marcus Williams, the black mechanic from the service department who had shared that knowing look with Stephanie, was called forward with a very different kind of conversation waiting for him. Stephanie had noticed Marcus during her time in the dealership, had seen the recognition in his eyes, and had observed his professionalism despite working in an environment where his race made him a target for the same kind of discrimination she had experienced. Marcus was offered a promotion to service manager, a position that would give him authority over the technical operations of the dealership, and put him in a leadership role where his experience and integrity could make a real difference. For Marcus, who had spent years keeping his head down and doing excellent work while watching discrimination happen around him, this promotion represented validation that competence and character would finally be rewarded over politics and prejudice. But Stephanie's message to the staff went beyond individual promotions and consequences. She gathered everyone in that showroom, salespeople, finance staff, service technicians, and administrative workers, and delivered a speech that would define the new culture of Wilson Mercedes. She made it clear that discrimination of any kind would result in immediate termination. She explained that customer service meant treating every person who walked through those doors with respect and professionalism, regardless of their race, gender, age or appearance. She outlined new policies for credit checks, test drives, and customer interactions that would ensure equal treatment for all customers. She established reporting procedures for discriminatory behavior and protection for employees who spoke up against bias. Most importantly, she made it clear that culture change wasn't optional. This wasn't a suggestion or a goal to work toward. This was the new reality, and anyone who couldn't adapt would find themselves working somewhere else. The staff members who had participated in or enabled the morning's discrimination were told they would face individual meetings to discuss their behavior and determine whether they could be part of the dealership's future. Some would receive additional training and second chances. Others would find that their employment was terminated, along with Brenda Wilson's. The message was clear. Accountability applied to everyone, and the toxic culture that had defined this dealership was ending immediately. If you want to see how this incredible transformation continues and what the final resolution looks like, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because the ending of this story will restore your faith in justice. With Brenda Wilson gone, Stephanie Thompson gathered the remaining staff for a conversation that would define the future of Wilson Mercedes. She shared her story, growing up in Detroit, parents working multiple jobs, facing discrimination throughout her career. But more importantly, she explained her choice to build something different with Thompson Automotive Group, where success was measured by how many people she could lift up. Stephanie outlined new policies that would govern their workplace. Credit checks would only be required when financing was actually pursued, applying equally to all customers. Test drives would be offered to anyone with genuine interest. Customer service would mean serving all customers with professionalism and respect. She established training programs focused on inclusive sales practices and created advancement opportunities based on performance and character rather than favoritism. Most importantly, speaking up against discrimination would be expected and protected. Jennifer Martinez was visibly emotional as she listened. This young woman had been threatened with termination for helping a customer professionally. Now, as newly promoted sales manager, she was being given the chance to build the workplace she had always hoped to find. The transformation was tested immediately when the same white customer who had witnessed Stephanie's earlier humiliation walked back in. Without hesitation, Stephanie approached him personally, introduced herself as the new owner, and asked how she could help. The customer was shocked to be assisted by the woman he'd seen escorted out by security. Stephanie treated him with complete professionalism, showing him vehicles and answering questions with expertise and courtesy. When he expressed interest in the same S-Class Mercedes that Stephanie had been denied, she personally handed him the keys for a test drive. The woman who had been told she didn't belong was now facilitating access to the exact vehicle she'd been denied. The sale was completed within 2 hours, the first under new management, conducted with the principles of respect and professionalism that would define the dealership going forward. As the day ended, Stephanie reflected on what had happened and shared a thought that captured her philosophy. Success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about creating spaces where everyone can prove themselves right. This wasn't about revenge or settling scores. It was about creating opportunities where talent could flourish regardless of background, where character mattered more than connections. According to the Minority Business Development Agency, minority-owned businesses represent only 18% of all U.S. businesses, despite minorities making up nearly 40% of the population. Workplace discrimination continues to affect hiring and promotion across industries. But Stephanie's story represents hope. It shows that change is possible, that individual actions can have broader impacts, and that success can be defined by lifting others up. Stephanie drove away that evening in the same S-Class Mercedes she had been denied that morning. But she wasn't driving it as personal victory. She was driving it as a reminder of the responsibility that comes with success. Behind her, The dealership was transforming in real time. Jennifer was implementing new policies. Marcus was creating excellence without discrimination in service, and the showroom bustled with diverse customers and staff. Thompson Automotive Group now operates 24 dealerships across 5 states, each built on the principles Stephanie demonstrated that day: equality, excellence, and the idea that everyone deserves dignity and respect. The most important legacy isn't about cars or sales. It's proof that one person's commitment to doing right can transform everyone's circumstances. It's a reminder that discrimination isn't just morally wrong. It's economically stupid and completely unnecessary. If this story of justice and transformation has inspired you, make sure you subscribe for more stories that show the power of standing up for what's right.